Feel free to. More coffee I hear is brewing, so we'll have more hopefully. If you didn't get any. So good morning and welcome to all of you here who are in the dining room and those who are joining us virtually. It's wonderful to be together this morning. And it's my honor to introduce, and let's be honest, for many, reintroduce, my friend and colleague, the very Reverend Tracy Lind, to St. Paul's, a parish of which Tracy has been a friend for a long time. Tracy is a retired Episcopal priest and city planner who was, in her own words, when we talked on Wednesday, she has lived on the edge for most of her career and her life. She's very well known to us in Cleveland as the former dean of Trinity Cathedral, Cleveland, where her ministry is focused on social and environmental justice, interfaith relations, sustainable urban development, arts and culture, and progressive theology. And more recently, Tracy's ministry has extended to include the spiritual insights and lessons that she and her wife, Emily, who's seated here in the pink, have gained from a life complicated by dementia. Tracy is the author of the book, Interrupted by God, Glimpses from the Edge. And there she weaves together her gifts of storytelling and photography, showing us where she has seen God on the edges of society, offering not exclusion, but embrace. And you can find some of Tracy's recent photography on display upstairs in the Nicholson v. White Art Gallery. Her installation, Altars of Intersection, is there now, and I encourage you to spend time with it. And now it's my honor to pass the microphone to Tracy, a priest and a person I have long admired and known. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here, and I want to thank my colleagues, including the rector, sitting back there. Jean, thank you for the invitation to be a part of the gallery this spring and to have an opportunity not only to worship with you on a somewhat frequent basis, but also to get to talk about this new project called the Altar of Intersection. And so we're going to have some technical challenges, and one of the challenges is that my moderate cognitive impairments mean that I have a hard time multitasking. But I have to multitask today, so I want everybody to bear with me. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. And to my friends in the deaf community, we're going to do the best we can with signing and photos. So I'm going to have to be over here moving photos around because that's what this is really all about. And I'm going to ask you to begin with me in a prayer written, in fact, by the beloved George Herbert, a 16th century Welsh priest. Let's pray. A broken altar, Lord, thy servant rears, made of a heart and cemented with tears, whose parts are as thy hand did frame, no workman's tool hath touched the same. A heart alone is such a stone, as nothing but thy power doth cut, wherefore each part of my hand, hard heart, meets in this frame to praise thy name. That if I had a chance to hold my peace, these stones to praise thee may not cease. O let thy blessed sacrifice be mine, and sanctify this altar to be thine. Amen. Over the past year, I've come to realize that I have spent most of my adult life, nearly 50 years, constructing and attending to altars. In the churches I've served, in the photographs I've made, and in the life I've built. And when I finished my most recent project, this multimedia photo installation, a friend and fellow photographer looked at it and said, "Tracy, you have created an altar." And he was correct in his observation. Intersections is a collection of my photos from 1992 to 2022 that explore some of the issues that I have and I continue to wrestle with in my life and work. They reflect the intersection of urban violence and urban decay, conflict in the Holy Land, the immigration crisis in America, the worldwide AIDS, COVID pandemic, global warming, institutional racism, homophobia, and anti-Semitism. For over a year, I pondered and prayed over these collection of images, knowing that I needed to share them as a group, but I didn't know how. And I talked with lots and lots of friends. Some of you had the opportunity to look at these pictures and help me think this through. And eventually I realized that together they do comprise the altar of my heart. And so I decided to present them as an altarpiece, a triptych of sorts. Together, these double-sided images that are digitally printed on paper and then sealed onto roughly painted wooden blocks, and then mounted on stands and separated by plumbing hardware to form an interactive altarpiece. As I worked on the project, I began to think about altars, and I started seeing even more altars in my photo collection. And really, that's not surprising, because I've intentionally looked for God in my life and in my photography practice. And recently, I was reminded of a quote in Rebecca Wells' 1999 novel, The Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood. Some of you probably read that book. And Sita, who is a character in the book, she's the little girl. Sita says, the whole world looks like little altars everywhere. She says this as she's swinging high from a pecan tree and can see everything below lit from within. So what's an altar? Well, the dictionary says an altar is a table or a raised platform used in many cultures and throughout history for sacrificial, Eucharistic, and other religious purposes. The word altar comes from the Latin word altare, which is akin to adolare, which means to burn up, as in a place where people made burnt offerings or sacrifices to the gods. Well, I would expand that definition to say an altar is a memorial of a place where God meets us. And truth be told, if you know anything about me, or you've heard me preach, or you've heard my TED Talk, or you've read my book, you know that I met God in a McDonald's. This McDonald's on 42nd Street, Madison Avenue in New York City is my primary altar. Instead of bread and wine, it's a cheeseburger, french fries, and a small Coke. Altars are places of forgiveness, reconciliation, places of worship, places of covenant, promise, prayer, and intercession. Altars are expressions of the Spirit, places of healing, of remembrance. This is Jim Morrison's grave in Paris. They're places of remembrance like this one, the Vietnam Memorial in Taos, New Mexico. They're places of daily ritual. This is my little altar in my study at home. Places of inspiration and awe. Places of transformation, of beauty, simplicity. This is Gandhi's gravesite. And complexity. Altars are places to land and rest, to offer sacrifice, to practice, to focus. They're places of the sacred, places to commemorate. They're places of purpose and places of clarity. I think an altar can be a table or a rock, a grove of trees, a cross, a beach, a bar. This is a pretty important bar for many of us in the LGBT movement. It's the Stonewall. A butcher block, a cement wall, a windowsill, a chair, a field, a gravestone, a road, a carving, a snowstorm, a sunset, a flower, a painting, a sculpture, a dresser top, a bookshelf, a collection of candles, a sign, a body. Anybody know what that is? It's a belly button piercing on a woman who is lying outside of a mud bath in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Altars are found in many, if not most, religious traditions. And according to the Hebrew scriptures, before the construction of the temple, the ancient Israelites built private and communal altars. Practically every prominent person in the Hebrew scriptures, with the notable exclusion of the major and minor prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and so on, they all built or they rebuilt altars to God. This is one that I built in the Judean desert. This is, in fact, at the wall of the well in Beersheba, where Isaac built an altar. This is symbolic of the great Exodus, one of many, exiles from the temple after it was destroyed. They built these altars to commemorate the receiving of land, reconciliation with family and friends, the conquering of other nations, and the giving and receiving of covenants. And in the Holy Land, wherever something of significance happened in Jesus' life, like Nazareth, where Mary lived, on the shores of Galilee, at the Mount of Beatitudes, I call this image fencing the gospel. Or down in the tomb, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, or the resurrection window in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. All of these places, somebody built an altar, and then a church, and often another church or a monastery. On top of the house where Peter lived in Capernaum, I believe there are 3 different churches built one right after another. In the tombs of the ancient Egyptians, altars were constructed to contain the offerings for both the deities and the deceased. And the surfaces of those altars were carved with vessels and items of food and drink. And the altar then began to supply the tomb's owner with eternal nourishment. In the Bronze Age, altars in Mesopotamia included small portable altars, tables of offering, and more substantial structures of masonry or rubble. You know, we are blessed with the Cleveland Museum of Art. You want to see altar work? Go to the CMA. But altars were really about sacrifice, and normally a burnt offering was the central act of ritual worship in ancient Greece. And the altar became the focus of the god or the goddess cult. And some altars were very, very simple. In fact, the altar of Zeus at Olympia was nothing more than a pile of ash from all of the sacrificial fires. And the cross on the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, the highest point, is a pile of stones that all of us pilgrims have left behind. In India, altars of all shapes and sizes are associated with sacrificial fires. And the building of an altar consequently identified with the ritual reconstruction of the universe. So it was a way to connect us on earth to the heavens above. Now in ancient Rome, the altars then got carved with the faces of the gods and the goddesses and the emperors. Interestingly, Native Americans don't build altars, but they do construct markers by the side of the road and I just lost the word. Help me, somebody. Totem poles. The Christian altar originally was a symbol of the table of the Last Supper and was to be used for the Eucharist. And once Christianity became associated with the empire, an imperial language was developed, and the altar came to symbolize a heavenly throne. And in conjunction with the bishop's cathedra, the seat of the bishop, it also came to symbolize divine authority of the church. Now, I'm going to assume this good group of Episcopalians, many of you watched yesterday's coronation. How many of you saw it? Okay, if you didn't, you got to get up, you got to see it. It's pretty amazing. It's Anglican worship at its finest. And truth be told, the king was not just coronated. The king was ordained. He was ordained as head of the church. And that's what was going on in the religious service. And you can see from all of that firsthand, all of that altar symbolism. As early as the 2nd century, Christians began holding Eucharistic meals at the tombs of our martyrs. And a stone mesa was placed over the tomb, and it created an altar. And again, connecting the living and the dead, the communion of saints in heaven and on earth, as we say. And sometimes there were full bodies under the altar. Now, I can't really get there, but if you look up there, this is the altar of the Mother Church of the Ursuline community in Brescia, Italy. And we went there on a pilgrimage after we built Trinity Commons, and we called it a piazza. Well, it's St. Angela de Merici that created the notion of the piazza. She told her nuns to go and be like a piazza. That's where this all comes from. That's where Trinity Commons, the whole theology of around it comes from. So Emily and I went on an Angela pilgrimage. And we got to the convent, and this ancient nun says to us, in very broken English Spanish, "Would you like to see Angela?" And we said, well, yeah, sure, she's dead. And they took us into this rundown little church, and they turned on the lights, and there is Angela above the altar. I do have a close-up of it, but it's really gross, so I didn't want to offend you. But I'm sitting there going, oh my God, and I said, can I get up close and take a picture? Sure, and I took a picture of her bones. Now, as churches developed, we created side altars, and the main altar would face east, and then there would be side altars, and these altars became so eloquent and elegant that they almost became idolatrous. So during the Reformation, in the 16th century, there was great opposition to the abundance of altars. And in 1522, Martin Luther declared that altars no longer associated with sacrifice in theological terms were completely inessential for the confession of the faith. And he wanted them removed from churches. But somewhat later, he realized that they could have a teaching function as it related to the Last Supper. So in 1533, Luther ruled that the altar, consisting of a single stone, could remain with the provision that the priest or the celebrant should always stand behind it and face the congregation. That's a really important part of the Reformation. And in the 1960s, under Pope John the 23rd, the Second Vatican Council decided that this should be the way churches were designed. And with the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, many Episcopal churches also shifted. Did St. Paul's have an altar that you couldn't get behind originally? Do you know, Gene?
No, not here.
Trinity did. And so that's why the lower altar was built in Trinity, was to allow the priest to face the people. Throughout history, there's been altar art. And altar pieces decorated the space above and behind the altar. This is a church dedicated to St. James of Santiago. These things this is Trinity Cathedral, one of the most elegant, and complex raritas in the Episcopal Church. They also could be made very simply, and they could be carved out of wood. Again, you can go to the Cleveland Museum of Art and see more traditional altar pieces than you can imagine. In addition to having altars as sacred places of worship, we also have shrines. And those are sometimes considered mini altars or macro chapels. This is a shrine of Saint Francis. Shrines to Mary. Our Lady of Guadalupe. They're very prevalent in Latin culture. It's a way of saying God is here, abide with God for a moment. This is one that we came across while walking the Camino de Santiago, and this is the most important wisdom in my whole life. Wherever you stand, be the soul of that place. That's what I try to live by. This is two niches that I came across in Rome. This is one near the Vatican, and this is one in the Jewish quarter. You know, the Greeks have a word for roadside shrines, and that same word, which I cannot begin to pronounce, is very close to the word for pilgrimage. So the idea would be the shrines would be along the pilgrimage routes, like the pilgrimage to Canterbury, Canterbury Tales, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, the pilgrimage to Santiago. The pilgrimage is all over the world. And throughout, when you're walking these pilgrimages, you come upon these little stop and note that God is here. In Central and South Asia, there are these stupas, and they're mound-like structures on which the body relics of the Buddha have been deposited, and sometimes Buddhas have been carved. In our modern world, there are wayside shrines everywhere, if you notice them. They're made of flowers, crosses, tennis shoes, graffiti. It says, remember the Armenian genocide. This one says, love is good. Love is so godly. They're rock piles. Sometimes it's rocks placed. They're candles. They're remembrances. They commemorate war graves. roadside traffic fatalities, gun shootings, moments of insight and heroic lives. They commemorate love affairs. In Paris, Princess Diana, where she died, is just a huge shrine. Elvis Presley, Graceland is a shrine. It's an altar to Elvis and all that he stood for. The Vietnam Memorial Wall, the Holocaust memorials. Those shrines call us to recall, remember, reconnect. Now, home shrines are something we can all build, and that's a very common thing in many traditions. How many of you have a home altar or home shrine? Oh, raise your hand high. Some of you do. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about here. This is a St. Joseph altar, and the giving and creating of St. Joseph altar, is considered women's work. It's a connection between the heavenly home and the earthly home. And they build these altars for St. Joseph's Day, and then they invite people to come and have food and drink and conversation. Again, Our Lady, the Virgin, this is in Detroit Shoreway. This is, I don't know where this is one, it's probably Detroit Shoreway too. And this is as well, my old neighborhood. Does anybody know who this one is? He's from Guatemala. This is an altar to Maximum, who is the liquor-drinking, chain-smoking god of vice. And he created him by bringing him liquor and by bringing him cigars and cigarettes and lighting candles. In Mexico, Day of the Dead, people make elaborate altars and then they go and have picnics. This is one of my favorite altars. This is a church in New Orleans 6 weeks after Katrina, and amidst the rubble saying, "We are open." Altars say a lot about who we are, what we believe, what we see, what we notice, what's important in our lives. They're mystical spaces that reflect and call to our spirit. I'm going to show you some home altars, and I want you to think about the little altars in the space of your life. What if you placed certain items in certain places? How do you display them? How do these items have special meaning to you? This is an up close of some of the things on my little altar. So you can see there's a cross and there's a mezuzah, because I am both Jewish and I am a follower of Jesus. I always have been, I always will be, and I try to honor that. But at the same time, I surround it with other symbols of the holy. And up there is one of my sacred places, Jeffrey Mansion in Columbus, Ohio. It was a place as a kid that I went. And one of the up-close photographs on the wall is of Jeffrey Mansion. This is an altar that was created in a home for people seeking refugee status on the other side of the border in Mexico from Arizona, a home established by the Episcopal churches. This is an altar of a dear friend of mine, a priest in New York. This is an altar of a friend of mine at one of the beach shacks out in Provincetown in the dunes. This is an altar of another friend. This is one of the most elaborate altars I've ever seen, and I can't remember where I saw it. This was an altar, if you will. This was Passover 2020, when we were having Seder with our family by Zoom. This is an altar of a little church in a village called Villa Sin Miedo, Life Without Fear in Puerto Rico, that again was established with the help of the Episcopal Church. And what it says there is, "Santa, come by here." A monastery in the desert of New Mexico. St. James the Fisherman, my beloved chapel in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, where I serve. And what I love about it is the toilet paper in front of the altar, because it says, this is important to us. This is a woman in Peru sorting her potatoes. For me, that's an altar. This is a man in a chapel in, oh, help me, Mary, what's the town just north of, what? Chamayo. And I asked him if I could take his picture, and I didn't realize he became one of the icons. This is a woman who is feeding people one of the beloved New Orleans restaurants after Katrina. That's an altar piece to me. An altar to soccer in Europe. An altar to love on Valentine's Day. Yes, an altar to Chanel. If you walk around the 9th arrondissement in Paris, you will see many altars to the fashion industry. An altar to wealth in New York. This is Judge Leslie Wells's former federal chambers. It's an altar of sorts. And she treated it. Leslie, I don't know if Leslie's here yet, but Leslie, one of your parishioners, Judge Wells, treated her federal bench with all the respect that one would give an altar. This is really interesting. This is in Utah, and it's called the Procession. This is just a natural stone formation, but it looks like priests and nuns and people processing up to an altar, a windowsill. This was a priest in New Orleans right after Katrina, and this was his home. That was his seminary. That's his toilet. This is an altar in Provincetown, beloved to some of us, to honor the women who were the wives of the fishermen of Provincetown. Yeah, there are altars to the gun industry. Whoops, we don't need to go away going too fast. Horses, 4-H. Anybody recognize that altar? Some of you must here. Somebody here is a member. This is the fishing club. I can't remember the name of it, but this is an altar to fishing. What?
Trout Unlimited.
It's one of the trout clubs out east. This is my brother-in-law's altar created on Christmas morning. Those are his socks right here. And in the end, it's all about being still and knowing that I am God. So I want to stop there, and I want to ask you to have conversation with me about altars, photography, the sacred. What do you think? Anybody want to add to the conversation? We have about 10 minutes. Yes, sir, in the back.
Would you comment about using the altar of Old St. John at the recent ordination of our Bishop Koji?
Well, Old St. John's, and I can say a couple things about that altar. The altar at Old St. John's is the original altar for Trinity Church. So Trinity is the oldest continuous church in the city, but it had many locations, and it started out as a house church, and then it became St. John's Church in Ohio City, and then eventually it moved downtown, and then Ohio City became the oldest continuous place of worship in the diocese. So that is the original altar of the diocese, and what Bishop Jolly is doing is she is making a connection with the ancestry, if you will, of our diocese. That we've also used that altar for all kinds of things. My friend Teresa here and I we're part of a hand project, standing at that altar with our hands in molds. It's been used for all sorts of things, that altar. And underneath that altar, it's part of the Underground Railroad. Yeah, thanks for asking that. Yeah.
So I think you've shown images of a lot of ancestors on these altars. Can you comment about ancestorhood in relation to altars and how they serve factors are difficult for remembrance or communication with our own ancestors?
Well, you probably can answer it a lot better than I can, but the way I understand, for me, the ancestors are an important part of my connectivity to the communion of saints, if you will, living and dead. And I often turn to my own ancestors, and people historically have turned to the ancestors for wisdom. And it's the same way that some people pray to Mary. It's the same way that some people pray to Jesus. I pray to God, and Jesus shows me how to do it. But some people pray to Jesus, right? Some of you might. Some people pray to Mary. I mean, I see those as the ancestors. And in my own life, as I've been coming to terms with the issues of dementia, you know, I've turned to my mom and her siblings who all lived and died with dementia and said, help guide me through this. There's a wonderful story of, the slave revolt, the great slave ship revolt, and it resulted in a trial. Remember, it was turned into a movie? Amistad. And then who was the lead character, the lead slave of the revolt?
What about the language? Spanish language or English language or what?
What about the language? The language used in altars? Well, I think people use their own language, but I remember in the movie The Amistad, where the lead African says to his attorney says, we're probably not going to win this trial, it's really hard. And the man on trial says, we have to win. The ancestors are counting on us to win, and they are there emboldening us to win. But altar language is the language of the people, whatever it is. Yeah.
So, I remember coming around the corner in a national park and saying, if I were a Native American, I would bury my dead here. And go around the corner and there was high on a cliff. So I'm talking about your experience, they call them thin spaces now.
Liminal spaces,
Yeah.
thin spaces, holy spaces.
So what about your experience with that? Is that an altar too?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And you can feel the energy of a thin space. You know it in your own body. You can feel the spirit of the holy moving when you come to a thin space, which is why you go, oh, wow, you take it in. Some of the really interesting thin spaces are the spaces underneath the cathedrals around the world in the old crypts, because those are the most ancient spaces, because we often built on pagan holy places, on Celtic holy places, on Native American holy places. I was always convinced that Trinity was built on somebody else's holy space, and that we needed to find ways to honor that. It was not always easy. Thank you for asking that. You all think about the liminal places in your life. Anybody got a liminal place they want to share? What's a liminal place for you? Well, Leo, you asked the question. What's one for you?
I have several, but one I can remember is coming down the Euclid Creek Reservation, Euclid Creek Road there, and in the fall, and incredibly brilliant vine climbing up a great tree. And
A vine climbing up a great tree on the Euclid Creek Reservation.
but is that, I mean, it was like,
Yes.
oh, be still and know.
I one day finally went for a walk a number of years ago over to what I call the gorge, what's it called, Dome Brook. And I walked down along behind your house. I had never done that. That's a liminal space for me. And I bet there are a lot of holy things that have happened along there over history. I saw another hand, yeah.
I was bird watching yesterday at Cleveland Lakefront Nature Preserve, and they were saying, okay, do you see the bluebird? It's like, no, there's a bluebird. And he told me how to follow the branch along. And so I'm following it down, and I go down a little, I go, whoa! And the brilliant blue of that bluebird was so striking and so beautiful. It just blew me away.
The brilliant blue, the feathers of a bluebird. Think about the serum blue color that we use during Advent. Brilliant blue, the color brings it out. Oh, thanks, Lee. Yeah, in the back. I don't even hear you. Stripes.
Molly.
Hi, Molly.
Isn't that river built on a former dump site?
Yes.
Yes.
Landfill. It's built on
So
landfill.
what
Bridge,
perhaps,
it's built on river bridge from the Cuyahoga. It was a containment site for the port.
so that just made me think of what you were just saying about building on top of holy sites. I don't necessarily think that a dump site, but maybe a what life and soul is in that place that they built that.
Well, and you bring up a really good point. Molly, is your name? Molly brings up a really good point because sometimes we find God in very unexpected places that people wouldn't say, this is beautiful. If you look at a lot of my photography, I find beauty and I find holy in places and in people and in things that we discard, in garbage, if you will. My last show was all about erosion and the beauty found in erosion. And in fact, Marianne Bryce helped me out with the altar because this was all put together very quickly. And we found some erosion cloth. That's the frontal of the altar is erosion cloth. And for me, that's symbolic because that's the beauty of what has been and what we need to reclaim. Thanks, Molly. Any other, yeah.
Just to go along with that, there's a commercial that's on now, and it shows a gang, and they talk about how they're discarded or overlooked, but they're a gang that's out doing good on the streets, and the tagline for the organization is Jesus Gets Us.
Yes, yeah, it's a very interesting thing that's going on, which also leads me to say tattoos can be body altered. And I don't have any pictures, I have a lot of photographs of tattoos, but if you think about a lot of what's going on, especially with younger adults in tattooing, it's a form of honoring the sacred for them. Okay, we only have a few more minutes. I want to take a couple more questions. Yeah.
So you spoke a bit about, say, altars that went from, say, a former landfill to something beautiful. But what about, say, you touched on the coronation yesterday, where there's a lot of problematic history in these altars. So
There's a lot of
how
problematic
do
history.
we honor those things that you were speaking of?
Well, I was pretty blown away by the coronation yesterday on a lot of levels. And I think you almost had to be a student of Anglicanism and in our tradition to really understand a lot of what was going on. But one of the things that the king did was in the procession coming out, he went and acknowledged and he thanked and he honored the non-Christian religious leaders who were there. That never has happened before. And I think there's this balance, and we're trying to balance it in the Episcopal Church, and I think some of it is what Jesse's preaching about today. How do you take some of a religion's particular iconography, if you will, or liturgy, or symbolism, and claim it as our own, and also honor others? And how do we claim our sacred without dismissing the sacred of someone else? I want to suggest, it is the tension of the Holy Land. That if you've not been to Israel and Palestine, it is a spit of land that people have been fighting over for millennia. How do you honor all that is there? And yeah, the monarchy is one of those really problematic pieces because he was ordained head of the church. That's a big part of what was going on. He was ordained servant of Christ for the British Isles and head of the Church of England. That was as much an ordination service as Ann Jolly's was a week ago. Yes, sir.
I have one more question. Up there said, "Be still and know that I am God." Well, what do you mean, be quiet or what? It's two different words.
What does it mean to be still? Be still means quiet down.
Be quiet.
You all probably understand that in the front row better than any of the rest of us. And you know, it's funny because you can make fun of that.
Don't
piece.
move.
That was taken in a trailer park. You can make fun of it, but that's one of the most profound remarks of religion. It's from the prophet Isaiah. Be still and know that I am God. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we're gonna bring this to a close because you gotta go to church, but I wanna say a couple of things. I wanna challenge you during this Easter tide, and as we move into the warmer months, and as we get to summer, I want to challenge you in a couple of ways. One is, I want to challenge you as you walk around the world to look for the sacred, to look for the shrines, to look for the altars, to look for the signs of God in the world. And maybe write them down at night. Maybe note them. That's my first challenge. Maybe everybody has got a phone. How many of you got an iPhone? Raise your hand, or something similar. Everybody in this room has a camera. Photography is as democratized as it possibly can be. Snap a picture of it. Put it on your screensaver on your computer and meditate with it. Secondly, take a look around your home and look at your own altars. The one that I referred to as the dresser was the photograph of a friend of mine sitting here. Mary, I'm going to find it. It's up here somewhere. Shoot, I don't know if I can put my hand up. Oh, there it is. So I went with my friend Mary Siebert, and we went up to that awful place called Ann Arbor. And then we went out to see Mary's aunt and uncle out in the country. And her aunt of blessed memory took me in to see her bedroom and show me family pictures. And I looked at that and I said, that is an altar. Because it's all the stuff that was important in her life. And then I gave the photograph to Mary, and recently her aunt died, and now Mary has a memory of the ancestors in that photograph and has it for her own altar. So I want you to go around your own homes and your offices. You still have an office. And take a look at the altar work in your sacred places. And if you don't have one, intentionally build one. Carefully, thoughtfully, prayerfully select some items, select a place, put the items in that place, and then come up with a practice that would honor that place. So I'm going to put somebody on the spot here. Lloyd, you're still going to the office. You couldn't wait to get back to the office. Lloyd's my next door neighbor. Lloyd, do you have special stuff in your office?
Well, toys in my office.
You have toys in your office, okay. And what kind of toys?
Oh, I have a Nerf gun, I have Slinkies, I have decks of cards, all sorts of things. Actually, when college kids come in, they play.
Okay, but they're reflective, actually, if you know Lloyd, they're reflective of who this guy is. And I wouldn't be surprised if you don't periodically have a guitar in the office. You take the stuff that makes up who you are and how you find the holy, and you collect it together. Okay, we need to bring this to a close. I want to invite you to take a look at the altar upstairs. Make sure you turn it around. If you take a picture, you can send it to me at Tracy Lind at mac.com, and I'd like to see the stories that you tell with this altar. And I'm hoping to do a lot more stuff with it and make it grow and be bigger and more interesting. So again, thank you, and thank you for being St. Paul's.